Welcome everybody to the next episode of the Cannabis Review. I'm delighted to be joined in this episode by Jeff Rawson, who's the founder and president of the Institute of Cannabis Science over in the US. How are you keeping today, Jeff?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I know you're a busy man at the moment. Everybody coming at you left, right, and center.
A lot of interest right now in this subject.
Yeah, there most certainly is. Can you maybe give everybody in like under 60 seconds an overview of how you decided to set up the Institute of Cannabis Science and what the main objective that you're looking to achieve is?
Yeah, so the Institute of Cannabis Science exists to do research that benefits consumers. In particular, my concern that led me to found the Institute was the misinformation in cannabis markets. That is, many products are not labeled accurately, and sometimes safety tests haven't even been performed properly. And all of this comes down to the fact that third-party labs provide the testing for the cultivators and producers who then sell the products. But sometimes these third-party labs themselves can be dishonest, and the producers will shop for the lab that gives them the best answer the producer wants. So that problem is called lab shopping. It's a common challenge in regulatory science. And we need nonprofits and other engagement in order to get regulators to fix the problems and in order to bring the scrutiny necessary so that we all have honest data about weed.
Okay, very interesting. So can we give everybody a quick little overview? What is science? Science is the measurement of different elements in the universe. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think that science, I agree. Science always starts with a measurement. Yep. So science is about making measurements and understanding a given property. Usually we examine some physical property or something that we notice around us in the universe. And then typically we try to measure it or quantify it in some way. That usually involves making a number, right? And once we figure out how to measure it and observe it, like say the brightness of light in a room and put a number to it, then we can use that information and try to draw some insights. That's really the goal, is to start with making a measurement, interpret the information, maybe make a range of measurements over some space, and then come away with an insight or real understanding.
Amazing. So what is the main way of measuring cannabis?
So the main way of measuring cannabis, and usually when we're measuring cannabis, what we're asking about is what are the main compounds that are in there? I think a lot of us know that tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, is sort of the main drug-like compound in cannabis, although there are a lot of other active compounds. So if I want to know how much THC is in my cannabis flower, well, I can't just look at it, right? I need to actually take that cannabis flower and soak it in some liquid until all the THC comes out into the liquid. And then I take up that liquid and I measure it very carefully to see exactly how much THC is dissolved. Then if I know the mass of the flower that I started with, I know how much THC was in that given mass. And that's a useful thing. That usually comes out as a percent.
Okay, and some of the stuff that we're seeing obviously in the moment is basically certain THC levels being stated at a certain number and it being actually a different number by the time it gets to the shelves. Is the issue happening at their testing the minute it's cultivated and it then has to go through a number of processes like machinery that's could devalue the THC or the cannabinoid content, or is it just lazy management at a cultivation level?
That's a really good question because actually, this one buzzword, THC inflation, is probably a couple of different regulatory problems. I believe that one thing that does happen is that some labs find they have an economic incentive to provide numbers that are a little bit larger than their competitors. And so I do believe that sometimes there is deliberate fraud. But also, a lot of the problem that we have specifically in Massachusetts, and this is also true in other states, but the regulations are different in each one. So the exact nature of the problems vary. But in Massachusetts, we have poor definitions for what counts as cured flower or dried flower, and the reporting basis for cannabinoid compounds and whether that's by dry weight basis. So what that comes down to is the amount of water in the cannabis flower at the time of testing is not specified by the regulations. And a significant amount of the weight of the cannabis flower comes from water. So if the flower could be wetter or drier, but the rules don't say exactly what moisture content I'm testing at, then I don't really know what the concentration means, because I don't know the total weight of the flower that was tested and how to compare that with the flower I buy. So some of the problem is bad definitions. Another challenge is that the THC in cannabis flower is not mostly actually the compound THC. It's mostly present as a precursor compound called tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, THCA. And it's upon heating that compound that it gets converted into THC in the process of smoking. So the differences in definitions of compounds or the differences in the actual compounds that are present make it difficult to say clearly what are the contents. And if I look at a label that tells me a THC percent, I need more information to know what that number really signifies. So there are several problems. I do believe that also sometimes degradation of cannabinoids can happen after packaging, but I don't believe that that's often a big problem, because most packages of cannabis flower don't sit around for years before they get sold. And it generally the flower, once it's packaged, is in the darkness. So it's not exposed to light, which tends to catalyze these reactions. And it's also kept pretty cool, like at room temperature. So if there were significant decomposition of cannabinoid compounds, we would see that in our testing, because we would see elevated levels of cannabinol, but we don't.
Yeah, so the spike in CBN would be able to tell if the degradation has happened at that level. Tell me this, in the compliance side of things, the third-party testing, is this stuff enforced, or are they more incentivized to have the big client, yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, we'll be able to get the level that you want? Or is there strict rules in any of the states where it's legalized, where the lab testing and the protocol is actually very regimented, and you can't, let's say, boost it up by an extra 5% to THC just because you're going to get a 24-month contract?
I think that's another good question. A better structured regulations are definitely more enforceable. That's definitely true. But to some degree, the problem that we have really comes from dishonest behavior, right? And it's a behavior problem and a problem of incentives, right? As you said, right? This yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full. I mean, that lab is serving the cultivator, and the cultivator is their client, their customer. And in America, at least, we always say the customer is always right. So the lab is doing good business if they give their customer exactly what their customer asks for. And if their customer calls up the lab every time they get a number they don't like and say, could you please retest that? I know there's more THC in my weed. Then the lab has to do that retest, right? So I understand the pressures that people are under, but we find that there's usually like 2 out of 10 labs that everyone knows in a given state are producing bad results. And those labs usually do pretty well.
Okay. And is it a case of basically there's no federal legalization, so therefore there's no standard testing agency like an FDA or something like that that's going around to every dispensary, or do they already exist in the relative states? They just can't cope with the quantity?
Well, each state has been tasked with coming up with its own regulatory and enforcement scheme. And so that's why the results are so different in each state. I do agree with you. If there was a more standardized approach, usually the federal government and federal agencies are much more proactive with stuff like this. And definitely in the state of Massachusetts, our regulatory agency has struggled to figure out what constitutes an effective action. So definitely improvements in the rules and regulations. That's why I founded the Institute of Cannabis Science, is because a nonprofit that what we do is we're a nonprofit, and we test products off the shelves ourselves and then provide information to people about what happens. So in a way, we kind of short circuit the whole usual process that you would wait for and provide answers right away, and fill in some of that gap that's left by a lack of federal enforcement.
Okay, moving on to the medical side of the cannabis industry, is the future of the over in Europe, I think we have a lot stricter rules. The pharma companies are ingrained in a lot of the kind of cosmetic ingredients and food and beverage type ingredients. Do you see within 10 years time that like 60 or 70% of this industry, from cosmetics to food and beverage, those molecule ingredients are going to come from, let's say, 3 or 4 major companies that have either perfected biosynthesis, or do you always think that there's going to be room for a cultivated flower and the environmental impact and the capital extensive outlay that goes with that?
That is very interesting. I have a couple of different thoughts about that, actually. So in terms of edibles and beverages, right, those kinds of cannabis products they fit a lot closer with standard consumer packaged goods. And the production of those, companies are finding pretty good success at being national leaders. So in fact, there are now like a lot of beverage companies for cannabis that are pretty new within the last couple of years that are actually, they're all buying their cannabinoid emulsion, right? Because cannabinoid compounds actually have terrible solubility in water. So just making an emulsion that's dissolved in water is a lot of work, right? Well, there's a company called Vertosa that makes cannabinoid emulsion in many states, and they sell their cannabinoid emulsion to many different beverage makers. So we're already seeing that some parts of the supply chain, the commodity parts of the supply chain, are firming up and being dominated by individual brands in some cases. And I believe that will continue to happen with beverages and edibles. But there is a large part of the cannabis consuming community that is very partial to smoking flower, and we're not going to stop anytime soon. And growing flower is a totally different process. It's not like making Coca-Cola. It's not really as much of a chemical process, and there's more art. So I believe that there will continue to be a robust sector producing craft cannabis, and I believe that there will also be a few big companies producing kind of commodity cannabis flower mids. I mean, a lot of people will probably diss it as the McDonald's of cannabis, but like some people will like it and it'll be affordable. But probably eventually, most of that, eventually with federal legalization, the other development that will happen is interstate commerce. And then what you will find is that the most economical place in the world to produce these mid-grade, pretty decent commodity cannabis that's not super craft, all of it will come from California. And it'll all be sun-grown. And that'll be by far the best, the most cost-effective way to produce modestly decent weed that's not absolute, top grade, right, for a large market. The same way we produce all our other produce in America.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how different the European and the North American markets end up coming over the next 10 to 20 years, because I'm sure you saw the news of Germany opening up for the social clubs and a trial period of 5 years. So it's a diluted version of what they were going to do. But in my opinion, it was always basically what was going to happen. The pharma biotech companies are so strong and powerful over here. They see the market has value in terms of being an ingredient supplier, and they're happy to let the non-for-profit flower activist side of the industry have at it right now. But they want to protect and ring fence that big chunk of the ingredient side industry. And it's going to be interesting to see how those two models end up coalescing, because when federal legalization comes, we all know how capitalism works, and it's the bigger and the stronger eat the smaller and the little, and then the bigger and the stronger want to expand outwards. And it's going to be interesting to see whether that model is available in Europe yet for the North American companies.
Yeah, I think that there's been a little bit of a difference because our banking and business environment has made it extremely difficult for any established company to dip its toe into this industry, right? So that's really prevented a lot of the tobacco companies and pharmaceutical companies from immediately launching a bunch of cannabis products. But you're right, and some of the market analysis that you point to in Europe also, it stands to reason, will be replicated here. People aren't, like, farmers aren't famous for getting rich, right? And so the people growing cannabis, like, it's not going to be such a ridiculous cash crop as some people seem to have hoped. And if the predictions come true, and 10 years from now, a really large percentage of the cannabis in America is consumed in beverages, then it's going to be more like you said, right? That's a chemical product. It's going to be made like Coca-Cola again, right? They ship bags of concentrate to different bottling plants in different states, right? And then they assemble their product in bottling plants, adding carbonated water. And it's going to be a similar process of distribution, right? That's a model that's already been scaled up. So that will definitely be a big part of the production. And then, yeah, there will be spaces for craft producers, and some of them will be like fine wineries.
Yeah.
Right? They'll make plenty of money and they'll be plenty famous, but that'll be a competitive thing to get into, and it'll be a different kind of art than what we see right now.
Yeah, well, would you believe I'm talking next to Anna Schwab, who basically we're going to break down genetics and a few other bits and pieces. So I'm very lucky to get to two experts such as yourselves now back to back and see both sides of this coin.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Say hi to her.
I most certainly will. We're just over our time now, Jeff. So unfortunately, we've got to wrap it up, but I could talk to you all day about the chemical processing cannabis. Hopefully, we maybe get to touch base again towards the end of the year, and we can give each other an update on the various territories and the medical advancements and scientific advancements.
That would be great.
Excellent.
Great.
Super stuff.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for your time. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you in the next episode.